In the soft hush of night, as the world quiets and your thoughts begin to drift, imagine a time long ago, a time of stone castles and flickering candlelight, of creaky wooden carts and the distant sound of church bells, but also a time of laws so strange, so oddly specific, that they seem plucked from the pages of a dream. Tonight, let us wander slowly through the dimly lit corridors of medieval Europe, where kings and peasants, monks and merchants all lived under rules that feel impossibly bizarre to us today. From laws about hats and bread to swan ownership and bans on nighttime turnip theft, we will drift together through the most peculiar corners of history. So rest your eyes, settle in, and prepare for a very sleepy stroll through the strange laws of the Middle Ages. In the world of medieval Europe, where daily life was shaped by superstition, faith, and the firm hand of authority, the law was not always built on logic or fairness. It was a patchwork of ancient customs, royal whims, and church decrees, all woven together into a tapestry that governed life in curious ways. Let's begin in a quiet English village, sometime in the 13th century. The cobblestone streets are muddy from the spring rains, and a local law dictates that all pigs walking the street must wear a ring through their nose. Why? Because it was believed to prevent them from rooting up the earth and destroying property. But of course, not all pigs obeyed, and the punishment for owners who didn't comply could include a fine, or worse, the confiscation of the pig itself, which meant both lost meat and lost income. This pig law is but one of many curious ordinances that governed village life. In some parts of Germany, it was illegal to wear shoes with points longer than 2 feet. These extravagant poulains were seen as a symbol of vanity, and the church frowned upon such flamboyant fashion. Those who wore them too long might be fined, or, in one case, required to cut off the tips in public, a humiliation that served as both punishment and warning. But let's walk now through the misty fields of France, where the law once demanded that bakers could not sell bread that was too small. Bread was the heart of every meal, and its fair distribution was serious business. In Paris, bakers who sold underweight loaves could be dragged through the streets, their tiny bread tied around their necks as a symbol of shame. It was said that some towns even required a bread inspector who would visit bakeries with scales and ensure that no one was shorted a single crumb. This obsession with fairness extended beyond food. In parts of Italy, it was illegal to insult someone publicly, unless you did it with a rhyme. Rhyme insulting became a strange loophole that poets and town jesters exploited freely. One could call a rival a fool or a pig, as long as it was set to meter and accompanied by a rhyme. Laws, after all, are easier to live with when they leave a little room for poetry. And then there was the curious case of animals put on trial. Yes, it was a very real and serious matter in medieval courts. Pigs who killed children, roosters who laid eggs, or even mice who stole grain. These animals were dragged before judges and given full trials with prosecutors, defense lawyers, and written verdicts. In 1386, a pig in Falaise, France, was tried for murdering a child and was not only sentenced to death, but dressed in human clothing before execution. The logic: if humans were responsible for sin, then so too could animals be. Across the kingdoms, the strangest of rules applied not only to people, but to the very concept of time. In medieval Ireland, a man could escape punishment if he simply ran faster than his accuser to the church steps. known as the right of sanctuary. Anyone who made it to a holy site was temporarily immune from arrest. This led to some very odd chases, with criminals sprinting barefoot across towns, clutching stolen apples or gold rings, desperate to reach the hallowed doorway before justice could catch up. And in England during the reign of King Edward III, a law was passed forbidding any man from kissing a woman in public. The goal was to encourage modesty and discourage sin. But it wasn't enforced equally. Noblemen were often let off with a warning, while peasants might find themselves whipped or fined for nothing more than a chaste kiss on the cheek. Let's pause and imagine the slow turning of the seasons in a medieval town. The cold of winter, the muddy thaw of spring, and with it, fresh regulations. In the Swiss Alps, laws were passed requiring every able-bodied man to participate in avalanche prevention. If someone refused, they could be exiled from the village for endangering lives. That meant no home, no firewood, no shared bread. Winding further down our sleepy path, we reached the peculiar laws surrounding animals of status. Swans, for instance, were legally protected birds in England. Only the king and those granted royal permission could own them. Killing a swan was not just a crime, it was treason. To prevent illegal swan ownership, a branding system was used. Swans were marked on their beaks, much like cattle, and officials patrolled the rivers checking beaks for counterfeit marks. There was even a law in medieval Denmark requiring all farmers to bring their cats to church once a year to be blessed. Cats were essential in keeping down rats and mice, and were seen as divine protectors of grain. To ensure they remained sacred and not demonic, they received a holy blessing. Cats who misbehaved during the service, however, were seen as suspicious and might be inspected more closely by the village priest. Among the strangest legal customs were those surrounding the dead. In parts of Eastern Europe, people believed that vampires were real and that they must be stopped by law. Villages created ordinances requiring graves to be dug extra deep with iron bars across the top. If a body was found to have moved, or if blood was seen at the mouth, the corpse might be tried posthumously. Punishments ranged from reburial to decapitation and burning. These legal actions, bizarre as they sound, were performed solemnly and with witnesses. In Germany, there was once a law declaring that beer could only be made with 3 ingredients: water, barley, and hops. Known as the Reinheitsgebot, or beer purity law, it was passed in 1516 and enforced with remarkable seriousness. Any brewer caught using other ingredients, honey, fruit, or herbs, could be fined or have their barrels destroyed. This law, oddly enough, still influences brewing today. Let us drift now into the lives of the peasants, who faced strict curfews and farming laws. In many towns, a bell rang at sunset to signal the start of cover fire, or couvre-feu, from which we get the modern word curfew. Fires had to be covered or extinguished, not just to prevent danger, but because nighttime was seen as sacred and dangerous. Spirits, it was believed, wandered freely in the dark, and a lit fire might attract unwanted attention. In some parts of France and Italy, a wife could take her husband to court for not fulfilling his marital duties. Judges would listen, often uncomfortably, to complaints of neglect and might issue warnings, fines, or in rare cases, annulments. These cases were handled with straight-faced solemnity, though you can imagine the awkward silences in the courtroom. The laws, as strange as they seem, were deeply rooted in the fears, values, and imaginations of the medieval mind. And they touched every part of life, from the way people dressed, to what they ate, to how they buried their dead. And as we move ever so slowly through the candlelit shadows of this forgotten age, we begin to notice something rather peculiar. That laws were not only written for people and animals, but sometimes for things that could not move at all. In certain towns, particularly in parts of France and the Low Countries, there were actual ordinances regarding trees. Ancient oaks, believed to house spirits or mark sacred boundaries, could not be cut down without permission from both the local lord and the church. If someone dared chop one without approval, it wasn't just considered property damage, it was a form of sacrilege. Punishment could include excommunication, public penance, or even the planting of 50 new saplings under watchful eyes. These trees were watched, measured, and even spoken to during rituals to ensure the land remained balanced. Moving now to the bustling merchant cities of the Holy Roman Empire, we encounter the curious law of coin shaving. In a time when coins were made from precious metals like silver and gold, it was not uncommon for unscrupulous individuals to shave tiny amounts from the edges and melt them down for profit. To combat this, some towns required all coins to be weighed at the gates. If a coin was underweight, the merchant could be jailed, even if they were not the one who shaved it. As a result, many towns developed their own official measuring stones, often kept under lock and key by a designated coin warden. But let's turn now toward the more delicate matter of smells. Yes, even odors were once legislated. In several medieval cities, including Florence and London, laws were passed regarding the control of offensive smells from tanneries, butcher shops, and privies. If your home or workshop produced an unbearable stench, neighbors could report you, and you might be fined or forced to move your trade to the edge of town. Tanneries in particular, where leather was processed using foul-smelling urine and animal brains, were required by law to operate downwind of residential areas, often by the riverside. In medieval Poland, the role of smell extended even further. There were laws that governed the placement of garlic and onions at market, because they were pungent and known to repel not just customers but supposedly spirits as well. These items could only be sold in certain open-air stalls, and vendors had to wash their hands in scented vinegar before handling coins. Let us now imagine a quiet evening in a rural village in Wales, where a shepherd carefully counts his flock by the pale moonlight. Here, the local law demands that any sheep found grazing on another man's pasture after dark must be sung to before being returned. This odd little custom was rooted in the belief that livestock was soothed by melody, and that doing so would show respect to both the animal and its rightful owner. If one failed to sing a returning song, the owner might accuse the borrower of theft or neglect. In some regions of Scotland, it was illegal to whistle indoors at night. The reason? Whistling was believed to summon fairies or spirits, and to do so in the hours after sunset was to invite mischief, or worse, into the home. Violators could be reprimanded by their parish priest or, in more superstitious regions, brought before a local elder for questioning. And so silence was the law after sundown, broken only by the soft creak of timbers and the occasional snore. Strangely enough, even the colors people wore were once dictated by law. In various parts of Europe, sumptuary laws spelled out exactly who could wear what. In England, only nobles were permitted to wear purple or crimson dyed fabric, which was incredibly expensive and made from rare insects or mollusks. A peasant who wore such colors, even by accident, might be stopped in the street and have the garment confiscated, sometimes even cut from their body on the spot. These laws weren't just about fashion. They reinforced the strict social hierarchy of the time. And in Spain, during the later Middle Ages, there were laws requiring newlyweds to spend their first night apart. The reason was not prudishness, but rather tradition. It was believed that spending the night in contemplation, prayer, and silence would bless the marriage and allow the spirits of ancestors to visit in dreams. Only on the second night would the couple be allowed to share a bed, often with candles lit and a priest's blessing freshly uttered. Let's pause again and picture the warm flicker of firelight on a stone wall, the hum of insects outside, and the slow, steady rhythm of time. These laws, though strange to our ears, were once the serious framework of a society that saw the world not just in practical terms, but in deeply spiritual and symbolic ways. Now let us wander into the heart of a medieval university town, perhaps Bologna or Paris, where young scholars read aloud from heavy books chained to wooden desks. Here, we find laws not only for learning, but for dreaming. One curious rule, passed by a faculty council in the 14th century, banned students from discussing their dreams aloud within school walls. The reason? Dreams were thought to be vulnerable to misinterpretation, and some were considered messages from demons. Sharing them openly could be seen as blasphemy, or worse, heresy. Violators could face academic punishment, including public penance in front of classmates. In many coastal towns, especially those near dangerous cliffs or swift rivers, there were laws against swimming after sunset. Not because it was unsafe, though it often was, but because it was believed that water spirits were more active at night. These laws were strictly enforced, and if someone drowned after ignoring the rule, their family might be fined for tempting fate. Even the common household broom was not immune to legal scrutiny. In parts of Eastern Europe, there were ordinances requiring brooms to be stored bristles down when not in use. Why? Because upside-down brooms were thought to invite witches or signal that a hex had been cast on the home. During times of panic, like outbreaks of the plague, inspectors might go door to door to ensure all brooms were properly positioned. A fine was small, but the fear was great. And so we float onward through the dim alleys and quiet corners of the past, discovering law after law that feels more like folklore than governance, yet each one written with serious ink, enforced with earnest faces, and remembered with strange reverence. The Middle Ages were filled with contradictions, deep faith and deep fear, rigid rules and wild superstition. And within all of it, the law wove its way like ivy through stone, shaping lives in ways gentle, absurd, and profound. Let us keep drifting, ever deeper into the sleepy landscape of forgotten decrees. And now, dear listener, as our long and quiet journey through the strange laws of medieval Europe comes to its close, let the flickering torches dim and the clatter of ancient streets fade softly into the background. We've wandered together through fields of forgotten rules, through market stalls and courtrooms, monasteries and moonlit roads. And though The world we glimpsed tonight was filled with curious customs and strange ideas. It was also filled with people not so unlike ourselves. People trying to make sense of the world, to find order, to keep their neighbors safe, or at least quiet. These laws, odd and often baffling, were once taken very seriously. They tell us stories, not just about kings and councils, but about fear, about hope, and about the endlessly creative ways humans try to bring structure to chaos. So rest now, knowing that the past, with all its quirks and contradictions, is gently behind us. Let the weight of the world ease from your shoulders, and let your thoughts drift like leaves on a slow-moving river. Soft, silent, and free. Thank you for joining me on this sleepy journey through time. Sleep well, and until we meet again, in another quiet corner of history, good night.